Welcome to the fourth installment in my 9-day bike trip series where I'm exploring central and eastern Ontario from the seat of my bicycle. In this segment I'll be traveling from Wolfe Island to Charleston Lake Provincial Park. My journey will begin with a ferry ride back to Kingston and will also include 2 other ferry rides because I'm planning to visit a small island called Howe Island. In the second half of the day I'll be heading inland from the St. Lawrence River, and I'm expecting the scenery will be significantly different than what I've seen so far in this trip. So I woke up this morning in my tent at around 7:15 a.m. Here on Wolfe Island I had the opportunity to camp in someone's yard thanks to a connection I made on a website called Warm Showers. Today is Tuesday, May 21st, 2019, and this school bus is a friendly reminder that the Victoria Day long weekend is now over. I had a quick breakfast of overnight oats, then got my tent and everything all packed up. The ferry service back to Kingston operates hourly, so I was careful to coordinate my morning to align with the ferry schedule. This long lineup of vehicles are all waiting to catch the ferry. I'm guessing many of the people live on Wolfe Island and have jobs to go to back on the mainland. I arrived at the ferry dock in time to catch the 8:30 ferry to Kingston. The temperature is about 11 degrees Celsius this morning, so I decided to check out the ferry's indoor passenger area. The name of this boat is the Wolfe Islander 3, and it went into operation in 1976. In a few years it'll be replaced with a slightly larger ferry that'll be electrically powered. The ferry was completely full this time, which means some of those vehicles waiting in that long line probably didn't make it on, and we'll have to wait another hour for the next one. The ferry ride takes about 20 minutes, and I spent the time applying some sunscreen and doing a minor repair to one of my shoes. I can see lots of clouds overhead, but the weather forecast predicts it should be another dry day of riding. Back on the mainland in Kingston, I watched the ferry pull away as I crossed the LaSalle Causeway. The lift bridge up ahead allows boats to access the Cataraqui River, which is the first link in the Rideau Canal waterway connecting Kingston with the city of Ottawa. After crossing the causeway, I rode past the Royal Military College of Canada and also the historic Fort Henry. Climbing this hill here you can see many layers of exposed sedimentary rock. The road I'm riding on is Highway 2, which is once the main east-west highway and stretched from Windsor all the way to Halifax. The portion of the highway that I'm riding on now is part of the Great Lakes Waterfront Trail, which is a signed bike route throughout Ontario. The shoreline that I'm following along is no longer Lake Ontario. After going east of Wolfe Island, Lake Ontario narrows and its name changes to the St. Lawrence River, which ultimately flows all the way to the Atlantic Ocean. The area I'm riding through is quite rural, but technically I'm still in the city of Kingston, which spans an enormous area of land. So this morning I'm planning on riding across an island called Howe Island. Howe Island is much smaller than Wolfe Island and also smaller than Amherst Island. However, it actually has 2 public ferries to get to it, and they're situated at either ends of the island. As far as my trip's concerned, this couldn't be any more ideal because it means I can ride the full length of the island and it'll give me a nice break from riding on Highway 2. What I hadn't accounted for, however, is that once every 2 weeks each ferry is shut down for 2 hours of routine maintenance, and today happens to be the day they're doing it. The staff told me it would be at least an hour and a half until they're up and running again, so I contemplated abandoning my plan, but ultimately decided to wait. I borrowed a pen from one of the other people waiting at the dock, and spent the time writing myself some notes about the details from the past 4 days of my trip, which will help me in making these videos when I get home. While I waited, a long lineup of vehicles gradually formed in anticipation of the ferry reopening. This ferry is significantly smaller than the other 2 ferries I've ridden on so far in this trip, and there wasn't enough room for many of the vehicles that had been waiting. As soon as the ferry pulled away from the dock, I could tell it moved a lot slower than the last ferry I was just on. While the ferry was shut down, I noticed they placed these concrete blocks on the deck, which I suspect are there to help the ferry with docking while the water levels in the river are higher than usual. From the middle of the channel I got one last look at the wind turbines back on Wolfe Island where I started this morning. The name of the ferry is the Frontenac Howe Islander, and as you can see it's a cable ferry. The main advantage of cable ferries is that since the cable keeps the ferry constrained to a fixed path, it's impossible for the ferry to be captured by pirates. Of course I'm only kidding. The real advantage is that the cable makes it a lot easier for docking in strong currents and bad weather. Since this ferry is relatively wide, it uses 2 cables to pull itself across. Unlike the other ferries from my trip, this one costs $6 for cars, but it's still free for bikes. As soon as I got off the ferry, I immediately knew that I made the right choice to wait the nearly 2 hours for this ferry. Howe Island is really beautiful and it seems so nice and peaceful. Also, the weather today is just so perfect. I've always loved the look of a blue sky with white puffy clouds. The current time is 12:15, and with my long wait for the ferry, I've only traveled about 20 kilometers so far today. Thankfully, the distance of my route today is the shortest of my entire trip. The population of Howe Island is approximately 600. Similar to Wolfe Island, most of the scenery here is agricultural. The first settler of Howe Island came here in 1810, and many of the earliest settlers were French, Canadian, and Irish immigrants. Fittingly, the settlers built a Catholic church here in 1858, and it was constructed using limestone that was quarried locally here from the island. The water out in the St. Lawrence River looks so nice and blue today. Howe Island is part of the same township as Wolfe Island, which is called Frontenac Islands. So I've now reached the east end of the island, and just as I was arriving, the ferry was already pulling away from the dock. I'm glad to see that this ferry seems to move really quickly, so hopefully it'll be back for another load shortly. Due to the higher than normal water level in the river, the ramp to get onto the ferry is partially underwater right now. So when the ferry arrived back, I loaded my bike on and we began our journey across the channel back to the mainland. This ferry is a cable ferry just like the last one, but it's significantly smaller with a maximum capacity of 3 vehicles. From what I read, this boat first went into operation in 1949 and spent the first 27 years of its life traveling back and forth at the other end of the island before a larger boat was acquired for that location. Out on the channel, the wind seems quite strong, with a lot of whitecaps on the water. I spotted a loon, which is the bird on our $1 coin here in Canada. Back on the mainland, I left the ferry dock and took my very last look at the St. Lawrence River for this trip. After getting off the ferry, I'm now within Leeds Grenville County, and I'm now entering the town of Gananoque. Gananoque bills itself as the Canadian gateway to the Thousand Islands and has a current population of 5,200. The town was established on the Gananoque River, and the first settlement here began in 1789. The time is now nearly 1:30, and I'm definitely looking forward to finding somewhere to have lunch. Gananoque has a really beautiful historic downtown with many interesting looking independent restaurants and shops. I've been craving breakfast food today, so I was really happy when I spotted the Hot Roast Company restaurant, which has a sign advertising their all-day breakfast. For lunch, I ordered what they call their 2x5, which consists of 2 eggs, 2 sausages, 2 bacon, 2 pancakes, and 2 slices of toast. Back on the road, I stopped at the Gananoque Metro grocery store to pick up some food that I can eat at my campsite for dinner tonight. My campsite will be far away from the nearest restaurant, so I'm glad I was able to have a big hot meal for lunch. That big highway I just crossed back there is Highway 401, which ultimately replaced Highway 2 and spans from Windsor all the way to the eastern border of Ontario. I traveled away from Gananoque heading in the northwest direction along Highway 2. As I was riding, I really started to notice the strong wind, which seemed to be coming from the north. When I reached my next turn and started heading north, I could certainly confirm the direction of that wind. Here I'm crossing over the CN rail line, and I'm riding on a much quieter road now. With the strong headwind slowing me down, I was starting to feel like I was hardly moving at all. I decided this would be a good chance to try out my new portable AM/FM radio to help take my mind off my slow progress. On the right is the St. Patrick's Catholic Church, which was once part of the same parish as the church I passed on Howe Island. With so much wind slowing me down as I ride, I decided to try reclining the seat on my recumbent bike to help cut through the wind better. I was only able to tilt it back slightly because the seat I'm using on this trip isn't the original seat for the bike, and when I recline it starts to interfere with my steering. The community I'm passing through here is called The Outlet, and it has a bridge and dam over the Wiltsey Creek, which is the only outlet from Charleston Lake. The time is now about 4:15, and just up the road was the first turnoff for Charleston Lake Provincial Park. I've been doing my best to try and ride quickly because I'm not sure what time the gatehouse at the park closes. I haven't made a reservation tonight and was hoping to simply purchase a camping permit at the gate, but unfortunately I arrived to discover that they closed half an hour ago. The main reason I avoid making reservations ahead of time is because Ontario Parks charges a crazy $11 booking fee for every reservation. So since the gatehouse was closed, I ended up having to use my phone to purchase my permit, and therefore was still forced to pay that fee. I selected a campsite within an area of the park known as the Shady Ridge Campground. The park seems quite quiet this evening, and there are only a few other campsites occupied. After arriving, I decided to take a short walk down to check out the lake. Charleston Lake is actually quite a large lake, though only one of the arms of it is visible from the shoreline. On the sandy beach, I spotted a young family of Canada geese. It's not particularly warm today, and I'm sure the water in the lake is pretty cold, but for some reason a swim at the end of a hard day of riding still seems appealing. After my swim, I did some unpacking back at my campsite, then took a walk to the nearby comfort station, which includes a laundry room. With me on this trip, I'm carrying 5 days worth of clothing, and now with 4 days of riding completed, I should be able to do my laundry once and have enough clothing for the rest of the trip. With 37 minutes to wait, I went back to my campsite and got to work pitching my tent. Just like at Sandbanks, I noticed some white trilliums. After the washing machine was finished, I brought my wet clothes back to my campsite and hung them up to dry on my clothesline. The park's laundry room has a dryer, but I always prefer to air dry my clothes. My dinner for tonight will be a tray of meat tortellini, which I've been planning on eating cold, but after reading the cooking instructions I discovered that the black plastic tray it comes with is actually designed to withstand the temperatures of a hot oven, so I decided to see if I could heat it up instead. Of course, the intense heat from the flames in my campfire would be sure to melt the plastic, but my plan is to get a few big logs burning and then let them die down and become hot coals. Hot coals provide a much more even heating source, and they're also a lot easier to adjust the temperature. With no signs whatsoever of melted plastic, I enjoyed my warm, tasty meal. As the sun was setting, I decided to take a walk down to the lake to admire the colorful sky. The strong wind that we had a few hours ago has disappeared, and it's become very calm and still. After having a quick shower, I was getting ready for bed, and I heard a rustling of leaves in the forest surrounding my campsite. I pointed my flashlight in that direction, and saw two glowing eyes looking back at me. Those eyes belonged to a raccoon, and there was another one following closely behind. Neither raccoon seemed to be afraid of me at all, but they both eventually disappeared into the woods. Fearing that they might come back in the night, I put all my food in my airtight dry sack and placed it in a location that's hopefully raccoon-proof. With that taken care of, I got in my tent and went to sleep. So today I rode my bike a total of 67 kilometers from Wolf Island to Charleston Lake Provincial Park. Stay tuned for the next episode in this video series, where tomorrow I'll be riding a windy route of roadways heading in the northwest direction from Charleston Lake Provincial Park to Sharbot Lake Provincial Park. I hope you enjoyed joining me for day 4 of this trip. If you watched all the way to the end of the video, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please leave a comment below, and thanks for watching.